Hello, I'm Stephanie Mandeville, NEA Rhode Island Communications Director, and today is Monday, December 14th, and this is Ask Larry and Bob, and I am joined, as I am each time, by NEARI President and NEARI Executive Director Larry Purtill and Bob Walsh, respectively. Happy 30th episode, gentlemen.
Yeah.
Happy 30th episode.
Hard to believe.
It is hard to believe.
Was
So we've been
9 months?
doing, yeah.
I was going to say it was 9 months ago yesterday. We were all in the staff meeting in the office. We got the phone call from the governor's office talking about going to distance learning.
That's right.
It was Friday the 13th. That's
Yes.
right.
What was that? It was March 13th.
Yep.
So it's going to be our last episode of 2020 today. So 'tis the season to have the ghosts of Christmas present, past, and future visit us. So we'll do a little where we are today. We'll talk about a little retrospective over the past 30 episodes. And then, you know, what to expect for the future being next week and next year. So where we are today, since at least the Thursday press conference of the governor, Dr. Alexander Scott is COVID positive. The governor herself is in quarantine, as are the folks that were up on stage, Dr. Chan, Commerce Secretary Pryor, and the Comms Director, Josh Block, are all in quarantine. We've had a batch of vaccine delivered and administered today, which is amazing.
The good news.
Yeah, good news is right. More than half of Rhode Island school districts have moved temporarily to distance learning. In that press conference, as we all know now, the governor chose that time to excoriate the superintendents who have moved their districts to distance learning, dusting off one of her old favorites, which was throwing in the towel and saying that they should be ashamed. And unfortunately, that public shaming collateral damage is our teachers who are working so hard, our ESPs, and frankly, and Bob, you've pointed this out a couple of times, those parents who made the difficult decision to choose distance learning all of this time and not do in person.
Well, I thought those comments were just appalling. To those superintendents, administrators, teachers, ESP members have worked so hard, and parents have been inconvenienced, and trying to make this work for the past 9 months has been so difficult. And we talk to the superintendents, and talking to them directly, we talk about not sleeping, worrying about all this stuff. Well, they certainly did too, because they know what is at stake. And for them to make a decision in the best interest of their students, that was just not only uncalled for, it was just not understanding what's really happening on the ground. And when you talk about today, Providence had, I think, 304 classrooms that were not covered. There were no substitutes there. Half the districts had gone to DL. We now have, RIDE has updated their calendar saying that districts have the flexibility next week. It's almost an encouragement, I think, to go to DL next week. With the storm coming tomorrow, Wednesday night, certainly as of Thursday, everyone should be distance learning. So there's a lot going on, and a lot's going to happen. And then some districts have already said there'll be DL the first week in January. We are encouraging that districts not go back until all students and staff have been tested. Supposedly that's ready to go. We know it's been tried in Providence, Lincoln, and Central Falls. So there's still a lot going on. But as of right now, after Wednesday, everyone should be distance learning.
Bob, Larry mentioned a bit of breaking news there about RIDE announcing shortly before we started recording that districts will now have the quote unquote flexibility to go to distance learning just prior to break, and then allow themselves the 2-week quarantine phase afterward, and that would extend to about January 15th.
Well, gee, I wish we had thought of that. Oh, wait, we did. And we called upon them to do exactly that. I had the opportunity to talk to a lot of folks in the media that reached a lot of our members. So thank everyone for the positive feedback on that. I talked last week to Gene Valicenti on the radio and TV, and Brandon Truitt on Channel 12 for pretty much a whole news cycle, and Dan York on the radio as well. And it's really the same message before and after the governor's press conference that bad facts or incorrect information lead to bad conclusions. A lot of folks who have been quoting everyone from Dr. Fauci to our local medical professionals about schools are safe. They're leaving out Dr. Fauci's opening statement at the beginning of the school year, which was, and the full statement was, when community transmission rates are low, schools can be made safe for students. In Rhode Island right now, community transmission rates are not low, and the schools have not been entirely made safe, even if they were in many instances. So we don't casually come to the recommendation that we should be in a pause right now. We hear from our folks on the front lines. The governor herself, I called out for having bad facts. Now, she doesn't run around and get them herself, so whoever gave her the information that she used to make the decision did her no justice. She is, as I have also said, really smart and able to analyze data, but if you don't have the right data, you make bad conclusions. Someone told her there were substitutes available for every classroom in the state. And as Larry already pointed out, today alone, there were 304 classrooms just in Providence that were uncovered. You'd think there were more subs available as more and more districts are going to distance learning, increasing that magical, mythical statewide pool, but clearly that is not the case.
Is it understood that that is such a disruption in learning?
Well, the disruption in learning and a disruption in safety, Stephanie, because what they do, because we're not going to leave children unsupervised, they will break up the pods and assign those students to other teachers, and then you don't have the safe social distancing that this whole back to school system was built on.
So Bob, before you go further, you talked about this a lot in those interviews over the course of the week about this disconnect. What is it that, we are hearing from so many teachers in ESP who are, some of them aren't even NEARI, some of them are AFT, and that's fine, about what is happening in the buildings. And there's such a disconnect between that and what we're hearing from the podium. And does she not care? Does she really not know? Like, what?
Yeah, it's troubling, and they focus, and we pointed this out because there are really two tracks of information that are important to consider. And I said on Gene Valicenti's show, if you took for the sake of argument that no student ever got COVID, and we know that's not true, of course they do, and there's plenty of examples of that, including some cover-up examples where the Trump administration squelched important information about transmission. But for the sake of argument, we still had a problem that needed to be addressed because we know that over 1,000 school staff have tested positive for coronavirus already this year, and countless more have had to quarantine because of exposure to it. And no better time to talk about the disruptive impact that has than today, where our governor is under quarantine because our director of health tested positive for coronavirus, and they were together last week. Now, the governor is the only person in the state for whom there is a designated substitute available, the lieutenant governor. There are no lieutenant teachers. There are 304 empty classrooms in Providence because of absences due to either coronavirus or quarantining or other illnesses, which you now in this day and age have to treat like coronavirus. There is no lieutenant teacher, and these classes are going uncovered, and there's nothing. It's the easiest way to explain the problem, that it's just not there, even independent of the other transmission issues. So you add those two things together, and we just don't understand why they are not paying attention to what's going on the front lines. And maybe today's begrudging announcement from the Department of Ed finally acknowledges the reality that our folks are facing. It's obviously been frustrating. And then they get into the discussion of, is distance learning as effective? No, I don't think so. I think in-person learning is the best thing for the vast majority of students, for so many reasons, not only educational, but social, emotional, everything else. But that's not what's been going on. This,
Of course
this,
not.
great, yeah, this strange hybrid system we have where some kids are in somewhere and everything. We're going to need some time. At the appropriate time, I hope that we advocate for a special program over the summer so the kids who need time to catch up can catch up. Hopefully there'll be revenues available from Washington to fund such a program. I mean, we're in it for the, we want this to work. We want Rhode Island, we want Rhode Island to go back to the reputation we had in March, that we closed first, we cracked down first, we were smart, we were responsible, and we were leading the country in the good way. Now we're leading the world in the bad way with number of cases and community transmission. Just so frustrated.
It is frustrating. And back in March, it's the teachers, those superintendents, the ESPs who answered the call and more than stepped up to make this thing get off the ground back in the spring. And it breaks my heart to see them working so hard and then to hear that coming from the podium. It's upsetting. It's upsetting to me.
As we said last week, the governor owes a lot of apologies to superintendents for making the right and courageous decision based on the information they saw, to the teachers and education support professionals who have been working twice as hard. And that's almost impossible because they work so hard already. And to the parents, a lot of parents made the decision from the first day to do distance learning. They weren't throwing in the towel. They were making an important decision based on their analysis of their own family's needs and made some sacrifices to do it. And it is horribly insulting to impose the governor's judgment over a professional in the field or a parent's judgment. And that needs to be called to account.
Absolutely. There's no expiration date on that, so I hope that comes. COVID response is obviously the huge number one thing that we're dealing with. However, Larry, organizationally, we're facing several important matters in addition to the COVID response. So you've got charter school expansion, teacher evals, student testing, and since much of this is covered by the council and the Board of Ed, why don't you give us a little report of what's happened in the recent past, and then what's going to happen this week, you think?
Well, tomorrow night, the K-12 Council will be voting for preliminary approval for 7 charter expansions and or new charters. And I will be voting against all 7 of those. This is preliminary approval. Final approving has to be done in the spring. It's not that, not well-meaning, and some may have merit, and certainly there are some good charter schools in Rhode Island. But when we look at these for tomorrow night, you're talking about over 5,000 opening up new charter schools that could impact up to 5,000 students in Providence and Central Falls. Money leaving those communities that are in dire straits right now and going to the charters. And the charter advocates, I've already had the arguments with them, and they continue, well, the money follows the student. Yes and no, because we all know that not if it's $15,000 to educate a student in a community, that's really not what it costs for most students, and the sending districts end up losing a lot of money. Providence could lose tens of millions of dollars. Here we are in tough budget times. Here we are with the Providence turnaround plan, and we're saying we're going to do this and do that and provide opportunities and improve education in Providence, yet we're going to take money away. For the students who are left behind, the overwhelming majority of students in Providence, they're going to have less money, they're going to have less resources, and how you improve a district with less money and less resources, it can't be done. So certainly, I know Colleen Callahan and I will be voting no. I'm afraid that it's still going to go through the council because it's what RIDE wants. However, people need to speak up because Providence is going to lose money, and I'm worried about those kids being left behind. And one of the reasons they talk about, well, there's test scores of this and test scores of that. And at the same time, we're talking about institutional racism, instructional racism, and there's a lot of people out there who think that a lot of that can be attributed to test scores and standardized testing. As a matter of fact, when NEA Rhode Island hosted Dr. Bettina Love at the end of last summer, I specifically asked her, as a white union leader, what is the one thing that I could do that would help students of color the most? Her answer was eliminate standardized testing. So, to base everything on test scores and to say that programs aren't working is false. It's a false narrative to start with. But even if you believe that, you're going to take money away from those areas that supposedly aren't working, and then you think things are going to improve. Again, it's a false narrative, and we need to put a pause on this. As I said in a hearing a couple of weeks ago, if $150 million dropped out of the sky, it could be a different argument, but that's not going to drop out of the sky. So we need to fight that. Standardized testing, we should put off for a year. We know what the results are going to be. And rightfully, how would you expect anything different with what's been going on? And Bob's point earlier about instead of sending your money to charter schools, how about setting up some academies this summer for students who need that little bit of extra help? The argument is, well, it goes back to the in-person argument too. Well, students need that for social, emotional well-being, for their mental health. Those issues that students face existed long before COVID, and they're going to exist after COVID. So let's solve those problems as we go forward. The last thing I'll say on that issue is, when it comes to Central Falls, a couple of these charters are no excuse charters, which I don't believe in to start with, because I'm sorry, just a regimented one shoe fits all doesn't fit. But if we're going to have no excuses, Central Falls has been under the control of the state and the Rhode Island Board of Education for almost 20 years. So if there's any excuses, why hasn't the state done something about it for the past 20 years? So if you're going to have no excuses, let's not blame anybody else. And if we're going to look in the mirror, so to speak, maybe the state and the Board of Ed need to look in the mirror on Central Falls. So I'm really concerned about, again, we had all the money in the world, but we don't. I'm concerned about the students whose parents won't get them into the lottery, who are going to be left behind. They're going to be our most vulnerable. They're going to need programs. They're going to need resources. They're going to need the money, and it's not going to be there. And then we're going to want to blame teachers and staff and everybody else. No, give them the money and the resources that they need. And to do that, you cannot fund these charters.
The simple way to think about the problem with standardized tests, they claim we need kids to do better on standardized tests so they can get into the top colleges. The top colleges have stopped making standardized tests a requirement for admissions once they realized that people could teach to the test, actually get better outcomes on the tests without increasing the intelligence or content knowledge of those groups of students beyond what's actually on the test. The critical thinking skills that go well beyond the ability of a standardized test to measure. And that's just the sad reality of it. It's just the wrong approach to public education, and it does a phenomenal disservice to the students. I think about before, well, maybe not before, but I don't remember there being SAT prep courses and all of that when I was a student over 40 years ago. You probably could have trained me to do better on a standardized test than the kids who are ahead of me in my class. That would not have made me smarter than those other students. It would have made me a better test taker. And you just have to acknowledge it's just such a, if someone is selling you a oversimplified solution to a complicated problem, they're probably not telling you everything you need to know.
Yeah. So that is a topic of discussion for the Board of Ed tomorrow, Larry, correct? Charters
Yes.
expansion. So we'll keep our eye on that. So we have obviously a lot of irons in the fire just because this is the last episode and we're approaching a bit of a break. We're still hammering on all of these things. But let's stop and take a moment to sort of look back at those 30 episodes or 29 other episodes that we have done. And I want to hear some of your reflections and highlights. Just to give you a few stats, our first episode was April 14th. And that was before I knew how to edit or how to use Zoom. So it's, we were in speaker mode. So it was our one big giant head at a time. And I was in my basement, so I looked like a blue Smurf. And topics, we talked about everything from hydroxychloroquine to how are we going to calculate 180 days of school. That was a while ago. We have been lucky enough to host guests like Deputy ED Jennifer Azevedo when we were talking about some of the legal strategies and legal implications of things. We've had our Government Relations Director, Pat Crowley, on. We've had Sarah Markey. We've had Val Staples, who runs the Children's Fund. And we have had our AFT friends, Frank Flynn and Colleen Callahan, as guests 4 times. Now, those 4 times include the live press conference that we held to call attention to the joint letter that Larry and Frank issued over to the governor, Alexander Scott, and AIG on those 8 requirements that we had, we wanted to be put in place before we would even return to school. That was carried live by Channel 12, and tens of thousands of viewers watched it, which I still can't believe. They came back to review some poll results and a leadership meeting that you all had with the governor. So there was a time when you were speaking, and we got many of those requirements that we wanted in the letter. So we talked about it at that episode, where masking was actually one of the things that we really, really pushed on. That was actually not going to be a thing, believe it or not. The third time they came on was when we discussed walkthroughs versus inspections, which seems like a million years ago. And finally, they came on to talk about the next joint letter that Larry and Frank put out to pause in-person learning over the holidays. So our friends over at AFT, welcome anytime. We've had them 4 times over. Any thoughts on some of the episodes that we've had or conversations that we've discussed?
Well,
That was a terrific recap. I was hoping for a highlight reel, of course, but
yeah,
I'm
but
glad some of those might get lost to history too.
she missed the most important one. The most watched episode was also my birthday. So
That's right.
True.
Correlation there.
The Larry birthday episode was the big one.
It was. Now, I had to look back to see the time frame of that. So that was episode 12, and that was July 13th, obviously, which is Larry's birthday. And it was also the episode right before that districts had to get their reopening plans
Yes.
into RIDE. So people were all on edge at that point, and we had almost 2,500 views of that episode. Our total views since April, 24,521 views. Total subscribers, 234 to our YouTube channel. We've had almost 85,000 impressions and almost 5% click-throughs of all of the links that we have put on the bottoms of our videos. So no highlight reel because I don't have time. In my distance learning office, I don't have time to go back and through.
People should know that this concept, not the pandemic, but the concept of doing this was Stephanie's idea. We had done one hilarious practice round a few weeks before the pandemic in the little room next to my office where, thank God there's no, well, you probably do have the tape, where we had a bell where you ring the bell to move to the next topic.
I was testing out concepts. I wanted. All right, recording. IGT and Twin River joining forces. Is this a workable solution?
Of course it is. I predicted it last November. Next question.
This sort of podcast in person, I was trying to figure it out. And sure enough, it became a necessity. About a month later when we all ended up having to go home. Didn't see that coming. So,
and we didn't, like you said, know that we could do it this way. We had a little
not an option.
Set up with there was a whole. So, thanks to the folks who have been with us the entire time, and to those who tune in when they think, oh, it might be an interesting show because of what the governor said at a press conference, which this show might contest.
Right. So when we first started, we were inundated with questions, and the question form I always still post, and folks are absolutely welcome to send in questions. We're just at that point in this where, one, I think everybody's super busy and a little bit numb, but the other is there's no other questions to ask. We've been talking about the same stuff for months, and just pushing and pushing and pushing to get questions answered and to get our requirements met, I guess, to put it. I don't know what else to put it.
Yeah, and I think we've started talking about what this could look like in 2021.
Right.
And potentially highlighting members. Mary Barden and our staff and others had the idea of doing something to bring new members in and introduce them to the membership. And we can do the same with local leaders and heads of other unions, as we've been lucky to have Frank and Colleen on so many times. And we'll see where we go with it. But hopefully it's been a useful thing to our members and the public in general.
I think the thing that stands out through all this, and you touched on it, Steph, was, we started all of this in working with the governor's office, working with everyone else the masks were an issue that we pushed for, and there were several other issues. And in fact, the governor thanked me, but through me, the organization for working with her and doing all this. And all of a sudden, when we started pushing back a little bit, those discussions slowed down quite a bit. And to me, now we're going to DL for the remainder part of the year, our district should be. And, hopefully everyone will be tested coming back. And those are two things we push for in the testing. So I think it's important. The message is there. You can't just listen to us when we're agreeing. You have to listen to us when we're disagreeing, because we're speaking for the people who are on the ground. And we've been saying for weeks that we're going to have a staff shortage. Well, Providence was true today with 304 people being out and classrooms being empty. That's not helping education like you discussed earlier. And it's not education the way it was a year ago. So we need to work together to get through that. And it can't be just when we agree with you. We're going to push back on what we believe is important for education for our members. And through all 30 episodes, that's what we tried to do. And I do think you're right. There are no more questions, or most of the questions have run out. Right now, the next question is, can we keep everyone tested in the new year? Can we keep in-person going? But to do that, we're going to need staffing. We're going to need people to follow the rules. We're going to need the testing, and we know the vaccine's coming. And today was great news, but not everyone's going to be vaccinated for several months. So we still have a ways to go on this.
And finally, since we're kind of in the wrap-up mode for the year, I would be remiss if I did not thank everybody at NEARI, our hardworking staff and governance. This has been a difficult year. Everybody came together with this new technology of ours. We have a few folks who prefer to work out of the office, which is otherwise closed to the world, and other staff can get in when they need to get things. But right from the bottom up or the top down, everyone's been working remarkably hard and been remarkably flexible in getting things done. And many of you know that because you've had to rely on them to help navigate so many new things that we never thought we'd have to deal with. So, year ends is also a time for appreciation, and everyone who works at NEARI has my great appreciation. I always jokingly put a note in my calendar for the last day of the year, retire ? Well, I'm not doing that, but it always makes me think back on the prior year. No, we'll stick around and keep fighting the fight.
A few more battles to fight and win.
Yeah.
Before we go.
There's always a new challenge to take on.
But our staff, as Bob is right, and I want to thank our local presidents, our local leaders. They've just gone above and beyond. It's just this pandemic only happens once a century, and it's been 102 years. And I think our local leaders and our members got through this to this point, and will get us through this. And the job they've done helping all students and helping everyone that they work with and deal with. It's just been remarkable. So hopefully they get a little bit of a rest over the next
I
couple.
was just going to say that. I hope that they have a chance to take a breath and rest.
Yes.
I am continually inspired by the constant work of our members. And I'm fortunate enough to have the best colleagues. So it's been a heck of a thing, trying to stay on top of the issues and make sure that our voice is heard in the press. It's been a challenge, and it's been a lot of new stuff. We've all had to learn some new stuff this year. So we know that we're going to hear from, I'm assuming it's the governor. I think it's moved to Friday this week, Bob,
It
or
is.
is it
Yes,
the lieutenant governor, or?
Governor's press conference has been moved to Friday because she's still in quarantine on Thursday. And by the way, that will be the day after the blizzard, which we think there's actually the B word blizzard coming on Thursday. That still a few days from certainty on how bad it will be, but it's not going to be good. So as we joked this morning, Mother Nature is weighing in on the side of keeping the schools closed. We may not even be in full distance learning if we get hit hard enough. Power supply might actually give the kids an old-fashioned snow day instead of a distance learning day.
That was going to be my last ask. We've had a lot of asks this year, but maybe we should count Thursday as an old-fashioned snow day, like Bob said. Count it as a school day, and yes, kids have to wear masks and keep social distance. Let them enjoy the snow and the storm, and have a real, just say, hey, time for a break. Thursday would be a good day.
Indeed. So on that note, we can just end there, and I'll say to our members, thank you, thank you, thank you for all that you do. We hope that you have a restful break and a safe and enjoyable holiday season. Thank you, gentlemen.
Thank you, Stephanie. Thank you, Larry.
Thanks, Bob.